Thomas mentioned I used to work for Instructure, so I worked on Canvas. It's an LMS. It's also open source. It's corporate open source, not community open source like ILIAS. But I've dealt with a lot of the similar problems that you all deal with at a technological level and working with teachers and students. At Lumen, we were an OER courseware provider, so that's open educational resources. So I'm a big OER nerd. I've seen from presentations that a bunch of you are as well, and that's very exciting for me. It's been fun seeing all these parallels between the things I care about and your community. And now I'm at IMS Global as a technical standards architect. And what that means is I try to get hundreds of people to agree on how to do something together. So that's, great hard work. That's really fun. I've added a couple things here to try to hopefully get you all to like me and think I'm cool. In der Schule hatte ich deutsche Literatur als Nebenfach. Das heißt, ich habe viele Bücher, die ich kaum verstehe. Also, I don't know if this one will help or not, but my Bundesliga teams are Dortmund and Hamburg. Hopefully it doesn't upset anybody. I don't know how strong the rivalries are in the Bundesliga for the fans, but those are my teams. And, we've had a lot of good American players in Dortmund lately, so you're welcome. But in case, sorry, no St. Pauli. Well, I don't dislike St. Pauli. They're just not mine. And then just to hopefully get everybody, I'm also a big fan of Deutsche Bahn, so everyone loves Deutsche Bahn. So, we all have something in common. I even went and dug out my Deutsche Bahn Krawatte. I had traded the train conductor for a tie one time, so I break that out on special occasions. So I will be doing this presentation in English. I do speak German, but I don't speak it well enough to give a presentation. So at the end, if there's questions, there's comments, I'll be able to understand you. But I'm really excited to be here again, and it's been really fun learning about your community. So who is IMS? IMS is a member organization. We've got almost 600 members across 27 countries. And how we work is the individual, thousands of people from those organizations come together and try to solve problems together. That's really what I think of this as is, we have communities from all these different groups coming together to work and solve problems. And the IMS community has many, many members from higher education, so universities, colleges, state and national systems, education associations, K-12, and then many, many, of course, ed tech vendors. And so, we're a growing community of trying to create technical specifications to help solve problems together. So what's that look like a little bit, as an overview? There's so many different systems involved in providing education experiences online. You all familiar, obviously, with learning management systems. That's what ILIAS is. But, a learning management system has to integrate with many other systems. Often a student information system, for example, like get the official record of what courses exist and the enrollments in those courses. Things like learning object repositories, content wants to be shared across many different systems, and how do you make those work together? Assessment systems, portals to access all the things, just random education tools. There's so many different systems out there, and kind of how IMS works is the experts and people from each of those communities come together and figure out how those systems can work together. The boundaries and borders between those, like how do we get from the LMS to the assessment system securely, with data privacy that we care about, and all those things. So that's kind of how I see IMS. And I've seen the same pattern the last couple of days in the ILIAS community. And I'll share some of those examples too. So that's, kind of how we work together. We have specifications or technical standards in each of these areas or each of these overlaps. I'm going to talk about one of those primarily today, but there are many others as well. A service, just a little bit more on IMS. Something we do is we not only do we create these technical specifications, we also do what we call certification for those. So say a university wants to adopt an LTI tool, they can say, hey, you must be certified, and that means that they have connected it to our system and we've validated that they're using it correctly, sending the right data, things like that. And we've certified thousands of products, and we do that all the time. And along with that, we also have what we call the data privacy vetting. So it's a rubric that we work with each of these vendors who provide education tools and talk through many of the security and data privacy implications of their system, and then put a rubric like this up that shows, hey, they're good at collecting data, but these people do advertising. Just try to make it really clear and communicate what these systems boundaries are. And so between working together to create those specifications, to validate that they work correctly, and the privacy implications, there's a lot of great information in the community and a lot of great folks working together to solve those. IMS, the bulk of the membership is in North America, but we are a global standards body. There's an official IMS Europe group that has a board and many members. I'll talk a bit about them more. And so just like everywhere else, there's many different groups across Europe that meet together to solve European specific needs. And they solve those within the European realm, and then a lot of those features also come out and are used across the world. So it's really fun for me to get to interact with so many different groups around the world. Other than the time zone problems, those can get tricky. My colleagues wanted me to let you know there's an upcoming event hosted, a good upcoming European event in combination with UNIS and JISC, and I don't know what that company is, but it's about assessment and feedback, and there's going to be a session on LTI and QTI. QTI is a standard for defining assessments and assessment questions, so something coming up next month if anyone is interested. And then finally about IMS, before I really get to LTI, these are my colleagues who live here in Europe. Marcus is in Sweden. He's a solution architect like me. And then Jill, she's from the UK. I believe she lives in France. And if you have any interest or want to get information about IMS Europe, Jill would be the one to email, and she'll be very happy to talk with you. So that's kind of me and IMS. That's why I'm here. Matthias invited me to talk about LTI, and this isn't meant to be a particularly technical presentation. I just kind of want to help you understand the problems it solves and the infrastructure it sets up for solving problems together. So let's get going. So LTI stands for Learning Tools Interoperability. It's really just a standard way to integrate web applications. The simplest way to think of it is as a single sign-on mechanism. So if you're in ILIAS and you want to get to an assessment tool, you could use LTI to move a user from ILIAS logged in at that assessment tool. ILIAS already implements LTI 1.1. It's an older version that is now deprecated, and something for those who are familiar with LTI a little bit already. In LTI 1.1, we use the word consumer and provider, but those are confusing with OAuth 2 and those services, and so that kept getting confusing because the relationships are opposite. So in LTI Advantage, LTI 1.3, that I'm talking about, we've switched our words we used from consumer and a provider to platform and tool, and so that we're trying to separate the confusion there. So a platform is something usually like ILIAS that you would embed a tool within, and ILIAS can actually be both a platform and a tool, which is super cool, and I'll talk about that too. It was super cool to see that. Moodle is the only other LMS that does that as well, and I love that. So platform and tool, those are important words to remember, vocabulary for you. So how does LTI work? What does it actually look like? So to me, the most important thing about LTI is that it provides, we really care about the interactions of the teachers and students with the system and trying to make that as simple as possible. Traditionally, if, a learner had an LMS and then they had to go to some other website to get a textbook, they have to navigate there, log in, do all that. Single sign-on helps because the user can get over there, but they still have these two interfaces to deal with, and they have to, or if a teacher wants to add an LTI link, they have to know what LTI is, and we don't want teachers to have to know what LTI is. And so to me, the great thing that LTI provides, not only is a normal single sign-on between systems, but it's meant to provide a great user experience. And what would that look like? So one more vocabulary word for you is called launches. When you go from one system to another, that's an LTI launch. That's the single sign-on part. And I'll emphasize that many times. So say you've got your beautiful LMS right here, ILIAS, and you've got a lesson, and all of these links aren't inside the LMS itself. These are all LTI links, let's say. And so the experience that LTI provides, or can provide when it makes sense, is that when a learner or a teacher clicks that link, that it does that LTI launch and loads the third-party system, but it's embedded within that page. And so they don't have to know or recognize that they're going to a different system. They can, but the idea is they click the next one and they just keep going to the next items. And for the learner, they're just reading their content and taking their assessments in the system they're already in. They're not learning multiple systems, especially nowadays as many education experiences are built from lots of different pieces together. You don't want the learner or the teacher to have to understand all those different pieces. And to me, I think the best thing about LTI is we care about the user experience, and we have to do a lot of work to make sure that's possible. Of course, there are many great use cases where it's, you won't be embedding it within the page. You'll just go to a whole nother browser, for example, and that's totally great too. So launches and moving a user from one system to another is one piece. And then the other piece of LTI 1.3 is API services. So LTI creates an infrastructure for API services, and they're just built in OAuth 2. I'll explain that in a second. But really what this allows is an LTI tool to say, like, hey, platform, who are the learners in this course? What are their roles? Or create an assignment and send scores for those. So the launches are kind of what the users see. That's the user interaction, and the services are the computers talking to each other to exchange information. So with each of those launches, a bunch of data can come across about that user, and this is where a lot of the strength and potential downsides of LTI are as well. So say a tool gets integrated in, when a user comes across, you get information, what LMS is it? You'd say this is ILIAS, or this is Canvas, or Moodle. The customer identifier, what school is this? Context information, usually that means what course is this? And so you can group users into that course. And then, of course, user information. Many people use LTI in a strictly anonymous fashion, meaning the only thing they send is an opaque ID. Opaque ID just means it's an ID that isn't necessarily tied to that person. It's just like an ID made up by the learning management system specifically for use with third-party providers. And so that's a very common way that you can send a user over. Sometimes it's just that ID, sometimes it's the ID and a name. It can be configured in the appropriate circumstance to send things like email and other stuff as well. So the point is that the platform should be able to control that and know what's appropriate for any given integration to send. And then another very important piece of information is the role. So if a teacher comes in, it will say, hey, they're a teacher. If they're a student, it says they're a student. And that allows a tool to provide the appropriate interface for whoever's coming in. And then the last thing of importance that I'll reference is when you come in via one of those LTI launches on the single sign-on, it also has a thing called the message type that indicates the purpose of this user coming over. Usually it's just to see content or use the tool, just load it. But there are more and more coming, for example, to discover content. They might be saying, hey, here's a teacher coming to find content, or here's an admin coming to delete some user data or request some user data. And those are part of, the user workflow, the message type there. So that's the launch part, and then the services are built on top of OAuth 2. So with LTI 1.1, the old version, how we did the launches and the services were just kind of a custom LTI only way. No one else did that. And so, you don't want to roll your own crypto, as they say. And so with the newer version, we made sure to build on top of existing open industry standards. And so that the LTI launch thing is built on the thing called OpenID Connect, which is fairly broadly used. So it's just OpenID Connect with the extra LTI data sitting on top of it. And then the services are built on top of OAuth 2. And so when you install an LTI tool into a platform, they exchange the necessary information so that the tool can get an API token. You can manage the scopes, that's the permissions that are allowed for that tool to use that service. And then something that's excellent is since these are kind of normal web API services, it's really easy to create new ones for specific integrations. LTI and IMS define standardized web services, but it's really easy to create your own custom ones to solve your own specific problems. And so the main point here is, LTI is solving specific problems with education data, but we're just built on top of OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. And I think that's an important emphasis to make there. So LTI, like I said, ILIAS has LTI 1.1, which is a deprecated version of LTI. The current one is LTI 1.3, and we've kind of separated it how we think about it. The LTI 1.3 core is that single sign-on doing the launch part of it, and that's really the same thing as LTI 1.1. And then LTI Advantage is a combination of multiple services implemented together. So someone might only need to do the single sign-on part and not do anything else, and that's great. But say there's a platform, usually an LMS, that wants to say, hey, I provide all of the functionality out there. It's kind of the baseline of what a quality integration looks like. And so I'll explain these three sources really quickly. Deep linking, I'm going to dive in much deeper in just a minute, but that is kind of, I mentioned it briefly, that content discovery workflow for teachers. Previously, if I'll dive into that in a minute. So it's for making it really easy to get LTI links into your LMS. So names and roles and assignments and grades are two of those API services. And they're pretty straightforward, actually. So say a tool wants to know what all the learners in the course are, they would use this names and roles service. And how that works is a tool can say, hey, give me all the users in the course, and the platform sends all that just in a normal JSON response, and it sends all the same, like it's configurable, and so it sends the same data that would happen from the LTI launch. So if you have it configured to not send names and emails, the names and role service will not receive those either. And then assignments and grades is for managing assignments and grades. One of the big problems with LTI 1.1 was that its grade management wasn't very robust, I guess. And this new service allows the tool to create assignments, manage their name, their titles, how many points are possible, and then send scores back for each of those grades. So it's a much more flexible way to manage your assignments and grades. And so all of this together is what we call LTI Advantage. So you've got the core and then the support services. So I want to give just a few three examples of how these standards grow. I've mentioned a few times we're a bunch of communities working together. I want to give some examples of that just within LTI. This happens across all of the IMS specifications, but again, I think I've seen these same patterns inside the ILIAS community these last couple of days, and I think it's really exciting to see the similarities there. So deep linking, let's get back to that. In the LTI 1.1 and in the past, if a teacher wanted to add an LTI link to a course, often they would go to that LTI tool, copy and paste the title, copy and paste the right URL, maybe some other information. It was a very manual process, and or maybe you would import or copy a course that already had all those things. So it's just, and the teacher had to know what LTI is and understand those things. And so deep linking was created by one LMS to try to solve that workflow problem and make it so teachers didn't have to do all this copying and pasting. And here's how it works. So say you're in your beautiful LMS here again, and you want to add some content. You already have a button in there that says, hey, add a native ILIAS content page or quiz or whatever it is, and you already have a button that says add content. And what they did was, in that area, when you say add content, now there's an area that lists LTI vendors that say, hey, I do deep linking. And when they click like, oh, I want to add content from this system, it does an LTI launch, usually the teacher, but could be a student, and says, hey, I'm a teacher in this course at this school trying to get content to embed in my LMS. And that allows the tool to provide a search interface for that teacher. And since they already know who the teacher is, what school they are, if there's a contract involved, they know how to filter it, or if it's a biology course, they could pre-filter it. But really, it's the teacher now has a nice little interface. They select things they want, and they say add to my course. And how deep linking works is it returns to the LMS. It brings that LTI links, but it can be images, HTML content, anything. And then those get added to the course. And so the teacher, just as I was emphasizing for students, they don't have to know these different systems and get it. For a teacher building their course, this allows them to just work in their learning management system and not have to manage and understand all these different systems or understand how they actually work together. They're just adding content to the course. And so this was super popular from that one LMS. And when the IMS community started working on LTI Advantage, the new version, that LMS and all the tools that we're using that said, hey, this needs to be standardized, and it's important enough that we should make it a core piece of what LTI is. And so now deep linking is part of LTI Advantage. And all of the kind of big LMSs have implemented this workflow, and it's in very broad use now. And it's so cool to, this is a great example to me of, hey, someone solved the problem they had, and then it became a community standard. And so I really love kind of the story of deep linking there. And that's kind of a big important one. It's part of core LTI. But the great thing about LTI, oh yeah, everyone celebrates and is happy. So another great example, I think kind of a smaller example, is what we call the course group service. So in LMSs, you have your student information system, and there might be official groups and groupings of students. But in the LMS, a teacher often has, just temporary local groups that only exist in the LMS, and that's not, data that gets exchanged by SAS or anything like that. And if an LTI tool wants to, group users together in those groups to do an activity, they need the information about who's in those groups. And there were two who needed this information, and normally in the past they would have just made their custom way to do this, solved their problem, and moved on. But because they're part of the LTI community, they actually defined an official spec document called the course group service that solves this problem that anyone can implement. And so because it's so easy to add a new LTI service, and that's the infrastructure they were already using, they just built it in a standardized way. And now this is a document that's ready to be used. It's been implemented by a few other people. It's not like deep linking and it's everybody, but I just think it's a great example because it's just a small group that just solved their problem in a standard way and made it so others can also use it. And then the last one example I have is called the data privacy launch. So in Europe, you're familiar with GDPR, and as I showed in those LTI messages, LTI can send a lot of data between systems, as can those services and other IMS things. And particularly in Europe and in Germany, you're much better at trying to manage who gets that data, where it goes, and how it's controlled. The European community really needed a way to bridge the gap between tools that have LTI data and the official requests that come in because of GDPR, but also, in Germany, you actually care about user privacy. We're not quite there in the US yet, sadly. So it's not just doing it because it's the law, you're doing it because you actually want to give people the opportunity to have that kind of control. And because of that, this is a great example where the Swedish education department, some German edtech companies, and a few other groups got together and said, hey, how can we build something in LTI that helps move us forward here? And so what they did was create a new LTI message type. That's the one when you have a user workflow and a user clicks a link and they say, hey, here's the user and this is what they're coming over for. And so what they made is a new standard message type that says, hey, here's learner or the admin, they're coming over to delete this data or just to access it or make a portability request. So standard doesn't define how the data moves or anything like that. It's just starting the request process, and then each vendor, would follow the same procedures that they already have in place. And so this is a new message. This one just kind of got done really recently in the last few months, really. So it's not really implemented anywhere yet, but it is defined and it's going to start to get implemented soon. So I think this is a great example too. So I really think those three examples together kind of show somewhat, how the LTI community and the IMS community work. And there's experts in all these different fields, some LMS, some tools, some SIS, in schools, and hey, we have these problems, government entities, let's solve them. And you actually get the folks together that help move those together. And I just really think that's exciting patterns. And like I said, I didn't get to see all the presentations here, but I saw a lot of the similar types of, oh wait, I'll get to that in a second. There's a lot of work going on with LTI because it is so extensible and flexible. People are creating lots and lots of new services and ways to interact with those. And I'm not going to talk about any of these specifically. We'll have time for questions at the end. So if anyone has a question, I can come back to this slide and describe what work is going on. But there's just always a lot of work going on from all these different groups moving forward. And it's really cool to see how much work is always happening in LTI specifically, also the other standards. So, right. It's been so fun for me to start to learn from the ILIAS community. Like I said, my job is getting hundreds of people to agree with each other. And so I'm often just kind of hopping into communities like this and learning from them and seeing what their issues are and how they work and helping get them involved with our work. And so, I just see all these communities have their own problems and there's overlaps of problems. And these are just some examples that I saw that I thought were really exciting as I've been here. Like this group in the Fachhochschule Dortmund, they're creating ILIAS extensions and additions that others are able to use, and I think that's really cool. How they're doing that. I really liked. I mentioned I'm an OER nerd. I like open educational resources, and this Das Lernbüro, like they had all these open resources in ILIAS that they wanted others to use and share, and so they were using your tools to get that data available to other people, and OER is a great example to me of you have to have standards for how data can move between systems in order to actually share content, because that's a really big and hard and annoying problem. And it was really cool to see you all doing that within the ILIAS community. Obviously this one on the bottom left here, I didn't get to see that one. It was at midnight my time and it's now 7 a.m. so I had to sleep, but I want to watch that recording. I thought this was so cool. You never know when a global pandemic is going to come and we won't be able to meet in person anymore. And I love that they worked on their, I can't think of the English word, the Austauschstudenten problem. They weren't getting together, but they still wanted these learners to interact. And so they connected multiple systems with LTI. Again, I didn't see it, so I don't know exactly how it worked. But to me, that's why standards and open standards are so important, because we're always going to have new problems to solve. And if those are there, then we're not working on solving the technical part. We're just working on connecting people and students and learners and teachers, and that's what we want to get to. We have to have the infrastructure to do that. But that's really the goal. And I think that was a great example of that. I love this kitchen sink presentation, the kind of design framework that you have. there's every group, every people have different needs of what their interface could look like or how it works. And I like that you were showing how ILIAS can be built and designed from all these different systems and pieces together. And you're really concentrating, thinking about user experience and the design of all that stuff. And I really think of the work we do as similar. Lots of people build their education experience from many different tools that exist, and if you can pull those together in the right way, you can create a great experience. And I thought that was really cool. And then obviously data security and privacy is very important, particularly in Europe and Germany, and in communities like open source communities like yours, where you really care about data sovereignty and things like that, and making sure that even though you're interacting with third parties and other groups within and outside your community, that you're able to define what those data privacy rules are and enforce them, and make sure it's configurable for the needs of that local community. And the thing I thought was super cool Uwe was showing was even just for the plugins for ILIAS, they each have their own little settings page, and they say like what data they collect, what data they use, and you had like settings for each of the plugins about what it's allowed to do. I thought that was a super cool, flexible plugin system for ILIAS, and that's really something we're trying to make LTI do as well. When you plug in a third-party tool, it should say very clearly, this is the data it wants and needs, and you can choose whether to send the things it wants, stuff like that. And so I really think that's a similar pattern that we're trying to make sure works not just within one LMS, but across many LMSs when tools are used like that. So, so in closing, really, I've loved being here and learning from you and your presentations, and seeing how cohesive your community is and the things that are important within Germany and other ILIAS communities. And so thank you for letting me come, and I'm excited to keep helping communities connect and solve these problems together, because I really think that's what education is. It's solving problems together continually. And so it's been great. Thank you very much. And that's it. Thank you. I do believe we'll have a few minutes for questions, and I'm happy to answer those, but that's the end of this.